Welcome to my humble abode. I am Yorkie the Talespinner, and this is our morning show, Tales Over Coffee, where we just start the day with a narrative tale and a coffee to welcome a hopefully blessed day together. And this is Suzerain, the continuing tale of Anton Rayne's rather failed presidency of Sordland. I think we're approaching the endgame, which is good. We're in Chapter 4, Checkmate. Turn 9, which we already made a lot of decisions within. I did look up just how many turns there are, and it's either 10 or 12, so we're reaching the end game. Enrica. Election speech at the USPHQ. The sun was starting to peek through the blinds of my suite at the Grand Chariot Hotel in Enrica. I hadn't slept at all that night. I was too busy thinking about how I would rally my party's Conservative base at today's election kick-off. I was just pulling on my clothes when two soft, sharp knocks came at the door. Lucian. "Good morning, sir," he said. "Morning, Lucian." Lucian sat down in the suite's office chair and pulled a piece of paper from his jacket pocket. "Just thought I'd drop off some talking points for your speech today." "Just like old times, eh?" "Indeed, for 4 long years." "Are you sure you can take another 4 years of me?" "I'm ready if you're Miss President. I'll see you at the rally." I almost forgot the Archpriest of Dyer couldn't be present today. No real surprise that I screwed up the ritual. Oops. But wants to relay a message of support to you and your family. What did he say? "I blew the rains down in Africa." Oh, I blessed the rains down in Africa. I blessed the rains down in Enrica. Much more sense. Lucian left the room. I finished putting on my tie and reread my notes from the morning speech. I'm really not appealing to the Conservative base. They're not going to vote for me. A few hours later, I was waiting in the wings of the North Auditorium in Enrica. The audience were several thousand of my Conservative supporters. I'm pretty sure we're not going to get elected anyway, so it's fine. Behind the podium hung a Swordish flag and a giant banner that read, "For a united Sordland." Enrica Mayor Curtin Lest gave a short introductory speech. I couldn't look at him without thinking about how I'd let Monica down. I stepped behind the podium and took a deep breath. Brothers and sisters of the USP. The past 3 years have seen our country tested again and again. Yet Sordland has Rayne administration stands strong. We'll go for the middle one. My re-election, I will finish pulling Sordland's economy from the depths. Well, it's kind of gone deeper into the depths with me. And begun to fix the disastrous economic decisions of my predecessors. Together we will get the economic crisis under control. As our militant centre-terror's part, I promise to uphold law and order. I will continue to defend Sordland against threats, whether internal or external. Continue to seek retribution from our enemies. Seek retribution from our enemies? You want them to enact retribution on you? What do you mean against? I will continue to fight for the constitutional reform Sordland deserves. Right now, this is more important. I will continue to root out corruption and wrongdoing, even within the institutions we hold dear. I remain committed to stamping out the corruption that has plagued Swordish corporations for too long. Thunderous applause erupted. I am the law. Yeah, no. USP remains strong and ever. There's been tremendous progress made in the term, and more to come. I promise you there is no way we can lose. I have devoted an unprecedented amount of effort towards making Sordland's economy the best in the world. We will not lose. I and Vice President Clavin shall lead Sordland into a bright new era. The youth and determination of my Vice President Clavin shall help guide us into a brilliant future. A roar shook the hall. We'll form a broad coalition of supporters to make sure morning finally comes. It is time, my fellow swords. A new dawn is upon us, and it begins right here and right now. I'm gonna. They know to vote for me. I'm not saying it again. I'm a gun of Escort. The audience enthusiastically finished the saying as streamers shot out of cannons behind me. My re-election campaign had officially begun. I stepped down from the podium. 2 news articles. Red Youth and Young Swords fight. Red Youth and Young Swords were once again involved in a large-scale fight. This time, the issue was the vandalism of a Sol statue in Lockhaven. Yesterday night, according to Young Sword members who wished to stay anonymous, said that he has seen Red Youth members put a clown wig and nose on the Sol statue at the city centre. On the other hand, an anonymous Red Youth member denied the claims. Both sides seem to have their own versions of the story, with no evidence from either side. What doesn't require evidence, however, is the 14 injured people lying in hospitals. We just wish that one day this will be able to go past their differences and make peace with each other. Young Swords oppress bloodish protesters. When is it enough? How long can we stand tolerant of the brutality of this fascist organisation? Bernard Circus has fought for his country, for the rights of every sword. In return, he got a bullet from his nationalistic group. Right now, the same group is beating and chasing away peaceful bloodish protesters, only because they are not originally sword. Still, the administration hasn't lifted a finger. Is this a democracy we fought for a long time? Gasum facilities occupied by rioters. Hundreds of rioters descended upon the natural gas facilities of Gasum in a bid to take over the private property. Police tried to stop the 3,000-strong group and managed to crowd control some of them, while others have entered the private facilities and taken over some of the buildings. More police units have arrived and began sieging the occupiers out of the offices. After a week of standoff in which the occupiers swelled in numbers, a massive clash resulted in the destruction of the facility and the death of 18 people. Oh, that's brilliant. Well done. Ark Sanctuary roof arson by vandals. Hundreds of vandals attacked the Ark Sanctuary and set fire to the roof of the Ark Sanctuary. The firefighters department and local police immediately intervened to prevent further damage to the building, and while fending off vandals that injured the firefighters. The police units found themselves surrounded by barricaded themselves in the Ark Sanctuary with the Archpriest. A reinforcement police contingency broke through the massive vault and saved the surrounding security units. Several armed rioters shot at police officers, while armed vehicles gunned down the violent armed rioters. The situation in the city is escalating. Oh, this is wonderful. Armed column rolls through rioters. Armoured column. The 3rd Armoured Division's military outpost was surrounded by nearly 10,000 rioters yesterday. The local commander reported a potential to be overwhelmed as a unit. The situation escalated when the colonel of the division ordered a battle formation and attacked the rioters with tanks and APCs, which resulted in 310 killed, 1,321 wounded. Many tanks of the column rolled through the protesters. When first aid and medical teams arrived to save lives, the colonel forbade them to treat the rioters, as they were branded enemies of the state. The division has since suppressed or killed all dissenting voices. Protesters occupied Blue Mansion and City Hall. The Blue Mansion was taken over by violent protesters that overwhelmed civil servants and state staff. Many were beaten, and the property was heavily damaged. The massive protests took over the City Hall and vandalised government property. Riot police tried to disperse the crowds, which resulted in a massive clash with hundreds of wounded police. Fires burned and smoke billowed into the night. Firefighters were working hard to prevent a mass fire. The city was in utter chaos after the event, and mass protesters seemed to be ever growing. More reinforcements of riot police have been called to help. Rioters destroy Ribri historical site. Rioters have looted the gold and jewellery found in the ancient caves underneath Ribri. While engaging with police forces, some suspects were caught, but the police unit suffered heavy casualties when the rioters used a bulldozer to run over a police formation. 14 police officers were heavily injured and hospitalised. The rioters descended upon the shops in the downtown area and destroyed most civilian property in the city. Some went further to hunt the police officers at the hospitals. Good God. Disguised rebels ambush police officers. Armed revolters have disguised themselves as construction workers and attacked several police officers with weapons. That led to several deaths in broad daylight. The police responded immediately, but several casualties were sustained. Most citizens began fighting against the police in the streets of Jen, causing the city to collapse into chaos. The police retreated back to their headquarters and kept engaging the rebellious protesters. Good God. Revolters take over Cultural Centre, declare headquarters. An estimated 6,000 revolters. Is this half the bloody country up in arms? Have taken over the massive Benfey Cultural Centre complex and declared it the headquarters of the revolution. Dozens of civilians were injured in the chaotic event, where the police tried to rescue hostages near the centre. A massive riot police formation is surrounding the centre as of now, but they are overwhelmed in numbers. Meanwhile, a large group of nearly 10,000 rioters began taking over the port, and engagements between police and civilians are ongoing. Briefing on the current economic situation. Bloody hell, we're in civil war here. I arrived at the Ministry of Economy and proceeded upstairs. An assistant waiting by the door to the meeting room took my jacket. I opened the door and entered the largest boardroom in the building. Simon was sitting alone with a glass of water and his documents laid out before him. He stood up when I entered and approached me. After a quick handshake, I took a seat. Good afternoon, Miss President. Good afternoon. A knock was heard on the door and Albin entered the room. Sorry, I got held up. Did you start yet? Mr. Vice President, not yet. Now that everyone is here, let's begin. As you know, said Simon, we're here to review the economic progress we've made over the past term and decide how to proceed. I'll brief you quickly on what we have done so far, just as a refresher. Begin. He gathered documents in a pile in front of him and adjusted his glasses. From the pile, he produced 2 booklets and handed them to us. Our extra focus on the economy has resulted in some small-scale positive growth. The extra resources have been a boon to my ministry. It would be great if we followed up on this focus during the next term. Let's take a deep dive into the details now. Please turn to page 5. I turn to page 5. Let's start off with our economic plan. I would like to say that we are on track, but unfortunately I cannot. Our decisions so far have not been in line with our initial intention for a planned economy. Yeah, that fell apart. It looks like we're going for a mixed approach instead, something between a planned and market economy. I don't see a problem with that. It is sometimes necessary and justified to deviate from a plan. I agree, circumstances change and so do plans, said Albin. Just pointing out the facts here, said Simon. Let's move on with the report. Please turn to page 16. I turn to page 16, titled Status of Trade and Effects on Foreign Policy. I'm happy to say that our trade has increased since the beginning of our term. We are on the right path. More trade means more vibrant economy, which means unbridled economic growth. Please turn to page 17. I turn. In our attempt to repair Sordland's economic system, we went for a mixed approach. We tried to cater to the needs of both businesses and Sordish citizens. It's been a delicate balance. Thankfully, living standards are steadily increasing. Well, they were until the rioters started destroying everything. We've been receiving fewer and fewer complaints about our welfare systems. That's terrific, said Albin, both for the people of Sordland and for our re-election prospects. Exactly, said Simon. Some of our industries have also been knocked down to their knees by recent taxations. The demand for these goods has decreased drastically, which led to businesses in these industries being shut down. Some people are calling the government out for infringing on their personal liberty. Apparently, some even filed lawsuits saying the taxes violate their human dignity. Their lawyers argued for them that they need it for mental health treatment. You don't need a fucking yacht for mental health treatment. Take it from someone who's lived his life with depression and anxiety of one level or another. Now turn to page 34. I turn to page 34. Our production rate has gone down since the beginning of the term. We're at a low point right now. Then we need to fix it as soon as possible. I need everyone on this next term. Of course, said Albin. I'll note that down. Moving on to logistics. Our situation has improved above and beyond our expectations. Our infrastructure projects have paid off in the long term. Smoother commutes, easier access, faster delivery times. Everybody's happy. We are very close to the end. I want to take a few minutes. I want to talk about a few numbers. Please turn to page 57. I have prepared a chart. I turn. Our inflation rate is currently at an amazing 2%, down from 7%. It's the lowest Sordland has ever seen. Then why is the economy the trash if all this is true? The Swedish rent value has been largely maintained and consumer prices have been stabilised. Good news for the Swedish people, said Albin. There's nothing more important than the well-being of our citizens. Agreed, said Simon. Mr. President, do you have any questions so far? How are we doing with unemployment? The unemployment rate remains steady at 16%. It was above that before. The change is mostly due to our lack of investments and economic planning. What's our debt situation? Our debt is currently 513 billion Swedish Rayne. Way more than the 427 billion Swedish Rayne at the beginning of our term. Basically, it has budged significantly down from where we started. I would still consider this an economic loss, as we inherited a recession. I would still consider... Okay. We essentially increased the possibility of an uncontrolled debt spiral. What are the latest numbers on our GDP? Our current GDP is 141 billion Swedish Rayne. A major decrease from the 310 we had at the beginning of our term. As per the latest stats, the economy shrank 18% in the last 4 years on average. In short, we are suffering from a decreased economic capacity. Those were all the questions I had. Very well. I want to quickly highlight our budget expenditure. My numbers indicate that overall we have been fairly balanced in spending our government budget. A balanced approach is good, however we shouldn't forget that money that is not spent is just a piece of paper. What money? We're -3 on budget. Now going into the elections and hopefully a second term, we need to decide on a way forward. One thing is clear, we need a bigger budget. We shouldn't start our term with a budget deficit. What should we do, Mr. President? Any ideas? Take an international loan from MFI. +2 government budget. Nothing comes to mind right now. We will have to make do with what we have. Well, take a loan. This will pose a risk to the reputation of our administration, but it can be done. I'll get right on it after this meeting. Now that's out of the way. During our first term, we have faced many challenges in the midst of recession. We have worked hard to fight against the odds, but it was not enough. Our economy has been hit hard by the fallout of the polio pandemic. Shops and even cities have to be completely shut down to protect our citizens and stop the spread of the deadly disease. Violent unrests are still happening across the country. The tensions chased away potential investments that would have created more jobs and boosted our economy. Simon paused to wipe his glasses. He swallowed before continuing. Mr. President, you may have surmised from the numbers I have given you that the economy has worsened considerably over the course of your administration. Yes, but from the initial statements you made, it should be doing better. I wanted to prepare you for the truth. This is no longer a mere recession. We have entered a period that historians might reasonably refer to as the Swedish Great Depression. We have broken our promises and failed our people. My only hope is that future generations will be able to forgive us when they look back. This is all my fault. I made the decisions that led us here. Do not blame yourself, Mr. President, said Albin. For one thing, the previous Vice President doesn't exactly strike me as an economic mastermind. I'm here to correct his mistakes. We will get through this together. That is all for our meeting today. Thank you for coming. The meeting dispersed. I hurried to the cafeteria to get a cup of coffee. Red Youth and Young Swords clash again. This is old news now. already. Morbol soon to be a ghost town. The mayor of Morbol requests financial aid for the city to combat the increased immigration. He reported the city will soon be a ghost town in a few years if no measures are taken. The lack of goods and materials flowing from Morna and Holsord is the main contributing factor. We can't just throw money at you anymore. HOS AIDS election campaign. Marcel Caronte's HOS Advertising, the biggest advertising agency in Sordland, volunteered to help the election campaign. They'll provide consulting and design work for campaign material. The agency will also produce video material for television, which will be televised extensively by the channels owned by the HOS media. HOS resorts will also be open to all party members and meetings during the campaign period. He certainly worked with us. NFP welcomes General Ludrin's son. The National Front Party has welcomed General Ludrin's son into their midst today in Holsord. Seeing a Ludrin back in politics is shocking to many citizens. General Ludrin infamously organised the military coup against the previous President Whiskey that led to the Sordish Civil War. Mr. Kibner has organised the events to appeal to his voter base. This is a symbolic step for the NFP, as Ludrin was arguably the most well-known nationalist in Sordland. Increased crime and racial violence plague Sana. The mayor of Sana requests financial aid and additional security for Sana. It reported a spike in racial violence and crime in the city. The lack of investment seems to intensify. Yes. Tons of salmon left rotting in storage. The mayor of Lankerg requests financial aid for the city to slow down the economic crash, triggered by a massive decrease in fish exports. The city is reported to have a problem in finding new customers. Tons of salmon are left to rot on a daily basis, which caused many fishermen to move away from the city. Not surprising. PFJP Richter's slogan, "Victory for Everyone." As the 1957 election starts to approach, Friends Richter and the People's Freedom and Justice Party are making waves in Lockhaven. Their campaign slogan, "Victory for Everyone," covered the city after a campaign visit to the city. The PFJP has been the United Sordland Party's major opposition since their formation, each year earning a higher percentage of votes. Blue Mansion, Lockhaven. The makeup crew had just finished their preparations for the interview. Lucian stopped me on the way to the balcony of the Blue Mansion, where the filming crew was standing ready to start filming. "Are you ready for the interview, sir?" "Yes." "Good. I've done my best to make this happen. This is very important for our administration. The crew is ready to start filming. Mr. Saka is excited to interview you. As I explained before, it would be bad press to decline this interview. They are the most prestigious interview program in the world, and they are from Kirut. The country is known for its neutrality. I don't think there will be too much pressure." "It's fine, I can handle it." I walked to the balcony and sat on the seat prepared for me directly in front of Mr. Saka. "Thomas Saka? Mr. President, welcome to One-on-One. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you. Let us begin with the latest incident between Sordland and Rumberg. An aircraft of the Sordish Air Forces was shot down by Rumbergian anti-air guns a few weeks ago. Officials from the Rumbergian government proclaimed that the aircraft was flying inside the airspace of Rumberg. Your government has been silenced apart from a few statements which claim that your plane was indeed in Sordish airspace when it was shot down. Do you believe the Rumbergian forces initiated an intentional attack?" You know what? Screw it. We have reasons to believe that, yes, they are being increasingly aggressive over the last years. Does that mean there will be more hostilities on the horizon? It's up to Rumberg to decide that now. Do you believe these harassments could lead to actual war between Sordland and Rumberg in the future? We will have to see, but if they want war, we will give them war. This week, the Arcasian government has condemned Rumberg for their actions against Sordland. Now that Sordland is a member of the ATO, do you think this would deter Rumberg from creating a broader conflict? Yes, it will deter them from creating a war, but they will likely continue their harassments in other ways. You have also claimed that Rumberg has been spying on your administration, and the alleged spy was none other than your own secretary. Rumberg has since denied all your claims. He's died into my eyes awaiting a response. Of course they'd deny it, however Sordland knows the truth. It's a very serious accusation, Mr. President. Well, the scandal caused by the results in Mr. Vectorn leaving his office. Resulted in Mr. Vectorn leaving his office. He was blamed and you appointed a new vice president. Many claim this was an internal political move designed to eliminate the vice president. What do you have to say about these accusations? It's all nonsense. We have evidence she was working for Rumberg. Her real name was Ilana Vance. Don't you think you were partly to blame? She was your secretary. It was going on right under your nose. To some extent, yes. All of our administration shares the responsibility for letting such a scandal take place. He didn't look like he was satisfied by my response. He stopped for a moment and took a brief look at his papers. Okay, let's turn back to your foreign policy. Let's talk about the ongoing conflict about the Helgeland Island. Sordland is not officially taking any sides between Agnolia and Valgsland. So far, you have refrained from making any statements about the conflict. According to reports from yesterday, Valgslandian Navy had finally attacked the Agnolian fleet at Helgeland Island. Today, Prime Minister Van Horten announced that the island is indeed under an invasion. He said Valgslandian troops landed on the island. So here's my question. What is and what will be the role of Sordland in this conflict? We stand with the people of Helgeland. What does that mean, Mr. President? It means we only support the people of Helgeland, not the governments or their war machines. Would Sordland also get involved if the situation gets out of control? Sordland has no intentions of intervening in we can't let the Machian Sea turn into a war. Okay, let's move on to another topic. Last year, a huge conflict took place close to your borders with Welland, when the Wessex forces partook in a massacre of bloody citizens under the guise of eliminating the Bloody Freedom Front. Sordland decided to watch the atrocities take place. In fact, you tightened your immigration laws, effectively closing the borders to the refugees fleeing from the massacre. Do you feel responsible for the thousands of lives that were lost in Welland? It breaks my heart to see so many die in Welland. Could we have done something? Definitely, but the conflict had nothing to do with us. Many have criticised Sordland for staying idle. Do you not accept any of the criticisms? Idle? We're not responsible for what happened inside Welland. You should ask those questions of Mr. Smolak. I'm talking to you now, Mr. President. Then I think you should interview Mr. Smolak. I'd love to if he'd accept our calls. But how about... On the gesture of the director, he stopped before finishing his sentence. Well, it seems that's all the time we have today. The director shouted at the crew to stop recording. We both stood up and shook hands. Thank you for your valuable time, Mr. President. It was a pleasure. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you for coming to Sordland. I hope to interview you again in the future. Lucian walked up to the director and started talking to him. I went inside the building. Oh God, all that news. Right, let's see here. WPB. Leader poisoned. Leader of the Workers' Party, Bloodia Fateh Jal, was poisoned by nerve agents and was hospitalized in serious condition. Hadn't that already happened? Controversial PR visits. Following a brief visit to Lockhaven, there has been an outcry against unpopular president, with violent protests feared to be imminent. The city is deeply unhappy with the president's term, and there have already been some calls for Rayne's resignation. You know what, I'm okay with that. I have a decent VP. I'm taking a lot of blame. Allow me to step down. Monsoon might return to WPB to fight to fill Ajel's role. According to reports from the capital, due to the serious condition of Ajel, the leadership of Workers' Party of Bloodia held an emergency meeting at their party headquarters in Holsword to appoint a new leader as their presidential candidate. After the meeting, the party invited Monsoon Lake to their headquarters. Workers' Party announces Lake as their replacement for Ajal. Okay, Sordland dependent on foreign help. I'm just reading the headlines, there's too much to read otherwise. Protesters occupy the Blue Mansion, we read the report on that. New force in politics, People's Front. Yesterday the leaders of CPS and WPB came together and announced a coalition name, People's Front. WPB's new leader, Monsoon Lake, chosen as a coalition presidential candidate. In their public statement, both leaders explained the reasons for their alliance as unfairness of high election threshold. Monsoon Lake is back at the WPB. Okay. CPS WPB from the People's Front. Form the People's Front. Alright. Rayne administration resorts to MFI loans. Necessary. Neck deep in mud. Ever since President Rayne entered the Maroon Palace, it's gotten worse. We are in the pit of an economic depression, where people are losing jobs, houses and lives on a daily basis. Either the president lacks the competency of a leader or pleasures himself on the suffering of others. Nice. Sordid Great Depression. Our businesses are closing left and right. Violence land occupies Helgeland. Alright, so that's what's going on. Residence of the President of Sordland, Holsword. I woke up in the early morning as usual. I put my clothes on and went downstairs. I made a cup of finely ground Sordish coffee and a slice of buttered toast and sat down in front of the TV to watch the morning news. By the way, are we still in number 9? Yes. The phone rang. I pick up the phone. The operator said that it was Albin Clavin on the line. Miss President, sorry for calling you directly, but this is important. I just received word that they started the impeachment process. What happened? To be frank, he took a deep breath, we might be screwed. They are citing a major scandal. I received a report and took notes. Here's what it says. President Rayne bribed Albin Clavin with a vice presidency position. It's come out while the Reform Committee was in session. President Rayne abused his powers, sent his son Frank Rayne to Holsword State University. President Rayne bribed Franz Richter with a cheque while the Reform Committee was in session. If I'd been popular, this would have passed freely. President Rayne has been in cahoots with the media mogul Marcel Caranti and Mr. Caranti's country club in Conriat. They struck a deal in which Mr. Caranti agreed to sway the media. The list goes on and on. They know about our goddamn deal. We will defend ourselves and present the best case possible, of course, but it will be hard. We need to stay optimistic. We may still have a chance, but for now I will let you take it all in. Talk to you later. The line dropped dead. Well, I'd say I'm so screwed I could be on Pornhub. Private meeting with Lilius Graf Manor. The historic Graf Manor lay on the outskirts of Avery at the end of the long, winding drive, nearly 2 centuries old. It was as formidable as Lilius herself. Lilius had invited me here for a private dinner, just the two of us. I wasn't sure of her motivations, but was happy to have an excuse to escape the chaos back in Holsword. Serge dropped me off at the door. Knock. Used the heavy brass door knocker to signal my arrival. The butler answered and showed me into the parlour. Gas lanterns lent the wood-panelled room a cosy orange glow. Lilius was sitting on the sofa. Above her hung a nearly life-size portrait of a sallow, unhappy-looking young woman in a lace ball gown. Is that you? My mother, actually. I was her only child, you know. Giving birth to me left her medically unable to conceive. My father never could forgive her for not bearing him a son, and she never forgave me. She took a measured sip of one of the 2 glasses of sparkling wine she was holding, handed me the other. Sounds like a painful childhood. The silver lining is that despite personally despising me, they felt compelled to grant me all the advantages a son would have, including the education I needed to rise to my current position. Would you be so kind as to tell me why you invited me over? Given how your wife spends her time these days, I thought you might be in need of a home-cooked supper. The butler silently stepped into the parlour and rang a silver bell. Speaking of which. She led me into the dining room where a glittering chandelier hung from the high ceiling. Beneath it was a long table set for 2. A woman in an apron and chef's hat, Wessex by her appearance, ceremoniously presented a roast rack of venison. Start eating. Aren't you forgetting something? Lilias bowed her head and said a quick prayer, then motioned for me to dig in. It was some of the best meat I'd ever had. We ate in silence for a while, then Lilias pensively laid down her cutlery. Mr. President, I wish I had been consulted on this military parade decision. Is that really the best use of our time and resources given the mounting unrest in the country? I worked things out diplomatically like I said I would. You and I both know that's not true. Your diplomacy was a disaster. What would you have me do? Shoot the lot of them? Lilias pursed her lips. Those scandal revelations about you are circulating in government circles and might soon spread out further. What do you think I should do about them? As strong leader would ignore the allegations and focus on winning the elections by all means necessary. Thanks for everything you've done, Lilias. Lilias nodded. Anton, thank you for all the help you've given to my ministry during your term. You followed through on your campaign promises and Sordland is stronger and safer for it. I do wish you had heeded my request to place the gendarmerie under my jurisdiction, and I regret that you caved to Masvalda and mandated the teaching of that evolution nonsense in schools. However, I'm grateful that you defended Swordish citizens' right not to subject their children to mandatory vaccinations. In any event, I'm looking forward to working more closely together during your next term. God willing. Lilias raised her glass and smiled. We clinked glasses. By the end of the meal, I was pleasantly full and a little tipsy. The butler had to lead me back through the manor's winding corridors until I found the door. I waved at Lilias out the window as Serge pulled away. The coming campaign would be turbulent, but at least I had her on my side. Or so I hoped. Yeah, let's not pretend. There's the next, and there's a report. ATO modernizes Air Force with new planes. Okay, I don't need to read that, but it's good news. Still turn 9. Victory Avenue, Holsword, City Centre. It was an unusual day for the residents of Holsword. Regularly used streets and avenues were blocked off by military personnel. Many shops and cafes were closed, and once crowded stores were now empty. Instead, thousands of residents in Holsword were concentrated in one street, Victory Avenue. Stretching out through the heart of Holsword, people on both sides of the road were waving their Swordish flags proudly for the military parade. I was getting prepared to embark on my trip. It was going to be a short drive down Victory Avenue until we reached Maroon Palace. My company for this trip was Joseph and Serge, as usual, driving the presidential car. Joseph approached me. He was wearing a decorated ceremony outfit. He carried a sword with a goat head at the handle and his pistol by his hip. He put on his cap. Mr. President, we're almost ready. We will depart right after the tank column. Good. Joseph nodded. After hearing the loud thump of a buck falling down to the floor, he turned to a couple of privates that were doing their preparations on schedule, started walking in their direction. Private, can't you do your job properly? I watched young soldiers perform a lousy salute to Joseph. What is that salute? Watch, this is a real salute. He performed an excellent salute, and after scolding the privates, he walked back. That doesn't give me much confidence, and our soldiers don't even know how to properly salute. I will have him educated. Yes, but if there's one, there's many. Serge appeared from the entrance and joined us. Mr. President, Mr. Lancier. Serge performed a salute to Yosef, which made Yosef smile under his moustache. At ease, Mr. Faulkner. Are we ready to depart yet? Yes, sir, said Serge. Follow me, please. We started following Serge through the corridors. Mr. President, have you seen the tanks? Our planes, too. Rumberg will be so scared when they see this. Yes, Serge, I've seen it. My kids were very excited to wake up today, to see the planes fly. Serge, where did you do your military service as a Yosef? Mona, 7th Artillery Squadron. I still talk with many of my friends from those days. Camaraderie of military is never forgotten, said Yosef. I still talk with many of from my days as well. There's a saying, blood is thicker than water, and people think that means blood as in family, it's thicker than other connections. It's actually not. It's from the military originally. And I don't remember the original saying, but it's something like the blood of the battlefield is stronger than the water of family connections, or something like that. So yeah, that's the point he's making. What about you, sir? All over Sordland, Mr. President was under my command once. Gumran outpost. Turned to me. Do you remember those days? Unfortunately, I do. Rough times. Indeed, those were rough times, said Yosef. We are here, sir, said Serge. We exited the building and walked over to the clearance, where the black Cadillac, the presidential car, was waiting. It was decorated properly for the event, and the top canopy had been removed so that I could stand and wave to people. On the way to the car, generals and admirals were lined up on both sides of the carpet. The atmosphere immediately changed when these experienced men who fought many times for their country saluted me. I saluted back with respect. I saluted the high-ranking military staff attaché from OTO. We shook hands before proceeding. I entered the car and Serge started the engine. Yosef saluted me. We were on our way shortly. Good luck, Mr. President. The car started rolling. Even though there were many walls and trees in between and the car and the crowd, I was able to hear the deafening sounds of cheering Sordish citizens. Gradually, we made our way to the starting point. A group of 10, maybe 12 latest technology S-16 fighter jets flew above our heads, and I thought that the engine sounds were going to leave me deaf. Loud footsteps of the marching soldiers were followed by loud noises coming from tank engines. The tanks came into view. They were not the most modern models, however, they displayed their military might. I couldn't even finish my thought, and one of the tanks broke down and had to be towed. Oh shit. Salute. Looking at the benches where the general staff was sitting, I saw Tarquin Sol sitting next to General Vulcan. From this distance it was hard to tell, but he tipped his hat off to me, and I could swear that he was smiling. We kept our slow and steady pace. We were almost at Arteris Whiskey Avenue, several hundred meters away. A group of soldiers saluted me as we passed by. They looked proud and stout in their new infantry uniforms and with brand new rifles. The convoy continued, as I looked around and saw that there was a military truck parked next to the statue in the distance. Is that truck part of the parade? I think so, sir. Although I am not sure why it's parked. We continued and neared the statue. The truck was standing in the middle. I noticed the music. In the middle of the road, blocking a parade a few dozen meters in front of us. What is going on? Do you see the truck? I don't know, sir, said Serge. Something's wrong. His jaw was clenched and he was intently watching. Serge then picked up the radio. There seems to be a truck on the way. Is this part of the schedule? 3 men who jumped out of the truck started running towards our car. They were holding Ka-74s pointed right at us. Serge, floor it now. Serge quickly accelerated the car. Gunmen started firing, and my ears started ringing. The sound of the bullet impacts were horrifying. The car hit one of the soldiers. We were about to crash into the truck in front of us. Hold on as tight as you can. I regained consciousness after the crash. The muffled screams from the crowd combined with the car horn. A brief gunfight ensued as the police and soldiers rushed over to secure the vehicle. My head was spinning and my ears were still ringing. The car horn just wouldn't stop. I looked over at the driver's seat. Serge's head was leaning against the wheel, completely motionless. Damn it, I froze. Emergency medical teams arrived and started examining me. After confirming that we had no injuries, I stood up and took a look around. Trails of blood were leading to the dead gunmen behind the presidential car. I watched medics pull Surge's lifeless body from the car and into a black body bag. Attention all citizens in Greater Halsord region. After the assassination attempt on President Rayne today, the city of Halsord and all nearby cities are now under an immediate lockdown. Temporary security measures will be taken while the investigations are underway. Please remain in your homes and report any suspicious behaviour to police. Do your duty for your country. 3 shot trying to kill Rayne. 3 assassins have been killed today after an attempt on President Rayne's life. During the much-anticipated military parade, attackers were seen jumping out of the military truck with Ka-74s as the president's car was passing nearby. In the middle of thousands of innocent people, they aimed at the president. The citywide search has begun to find the connections of the assailants as the Halsord police is at high alert. President Rayne was seen shaken by the incident as we moved to a hospital. Screw me being moved to a hospital. Let's hold a commemoration of my driver. Attempt to murder Rayne fails. President Rayne's life has been threatened today during a military parade. 3 men with rifles jumped out of a truck and started shooting at the president's car. Thankfully, the attempt has failed. The government officials are warning everyone to go back to their homes as the investigations are now underway. The entire Halsord police force seems to have been dispatched, with many more coming in from nearby cities. Truly, this has been a scary day for Sordland and a close call for President Rayne. Who is behind the assassination attempt? Well, you've not exactly helped things, have you, Radical? How is this even possible in the military parade? Surrounded by tanks, jets and thousands of soldiers, 3 assassins jumped out of a military truck in an attempt to kill Rayne. How could this even happen? This has to be an inside job, period. There is simply no other way that would justify assassins jumping out of a military truck during a parade. President Rayne better be more careful with who he trusts from now on. No matter what, a president is a president. Rayne is a democratically elected head of our country, and an attack on him means an attack on democracy and Sordland. We hope the reasons behind the attack is found with haste, so that we can get some answers. Interior opens investigation into assassination attempt. With judiciary approval, Minister of Interior has opened an investigation into the recent assassination attempt. Police force and private detectives have been deployed. Higher security measures have been put in place to avoid any future attempt. Parade reports. Josef Lancia reported that military personnel who were involved with the parade's organisation and security checks have been put under custody until further notice. Understandable. ATO modernised their force with new planes. That's fine. Anything else? No. Will of the state. This looks like the election. News. World leaders to gather at Alliance of Nations. Calling for a session on the current affairs, world leaders will be gathered at the Alliance of Nations next week. The main highlights from the upcoming agenda were announced, and as expected they will be centred around the current issues in Eastern Makopa. In addition to the member states from the region, President Walker and Chairman Melinev will be delivering their speeches at the Assembly. All eyes will turn to Constantium, Kirut, as the historic session will be taking place in the Alliance of Nations headquarters. Schedule of Alliance of Nations session. We have received the schedule for the upcoming Alliance of Nations session. According to the dates outlined, Sordland 1 is being prepared for the flight to Constantium, Kirut. Minister of Foreign Affairs David Whiskey will be attending the session, as well as accompanying President on the flight. Allsword Grand Cemetery. Allsword. Surge's funeral. The light drizzle was coming down as my car came to a stop by the Allsword Grand Cemetery. My new driver opened the door. I'd forgotten his name already. He offered to carry my umbrella. I'll hold my own umbrella. On the watchful eyes of security officers in military uniforms, I started walking amongst the gravestones. A small crowd of family and friends gathered around the final resting place of Serge Faulkner. Some in the media were calling him a hero, a brave driver who saved the president by sacrificing his life. It was true. Despite my protests, security wouldn't permit a larger funeral. I walked up to his widow, Susan. I'd never met her in person before. She was holding a framed photo of Serge in her arms. I am so sorry for everything. We hugged and she cried on my shoulder. I crouched out next to Serge's children. Little George was crying silently next to his sister Erica. Wipe their tears. Your father was a great man, don't ever forget that. They don't really need to hear that right now. It's okay to cry, let it all out. They were too young to experience the pain of losing a father. I walked over to stand next to the priest, who stepped back upon my arrival. I looked around at everyone's faces. Today we are mourning a hero of our nation. Today we're sending off a friend, a husband, and a father. I want to say both of those, actually. Today we are mourning a hero of our nation who is also a personal friend, a husband, and a father. But I can't, so hero of the nation. Serge Volker was a true sword. He was honest, proud, and brave. He was more than a simple driver for me. He was a real friend. I wouldn't be able to find a single person who did not enjoy his company. His memory is engraved in all our minds and hearts. We must remember him well. I will always cherish the moments I spent with him. I'll be forever burdened by the fact that this happened because of me. The family left behind will have the full support of the government. I'm granting him the title Hero of Sordland. Talking of unity, that's fine, but right now I'm focused on my driver, Serge. May his memory last forever. The casket started to be lowered. As the casket hit the ground, mourners sprinkled handfuls of dirt on Serge's grave. His wife and children hugged each other. I realized it was time for me to leave. As I turned my back on Serge's final resting place, I looked up at the dark clouds above. It started pouring. I have no wish to leave. I wish to be at his graveside. The President attends driver's funeral. In his first public appearance since the tragic accident of his motorcade, President Rayne attended the funeral of his deceased driver, Serge Faulkner. Still not known which faction or factions had the audacity to plan such a blatant attempt on the President's life. Due to lingering uncertainty, the funeral was a small private affair, with only a small group of family and friends, as well as heavy security in attendance. Serge Faulkner, hero of Sordland. Coming from a middle-class upbringing, Serge Faulkner lived an honest and earnest life. For more than 2 decades, he served as a driver and bodyguard to government officials. He rose up among his peers and distinguished himself so much that he became the driver of the President of Sordland. He selflessly did everything in his ability to do his job impeccably. He sacrificed his own life to protect the President at the cost of his own life. His children may now grow up without a father, but they will always know that Serge Faulkner was the hero of Sordland. Farewell, Serge. Funeral held for hero driver. Serge Faulkner, the chauffeur who selflessly gave his own life to block an assassination attempt on President Rayne, was laid to rest at Holsord Grand Cemetery today. The President, as well as a small circle of Faulkner's family and friends, was in attendance. Meanwhile, the brave driver has become something of a folk hero to thousands of swords. Songs have been written in his name. A building-sized mural of him has been painted in his hometown. We can rest assured that Serge will not be forgotten. Alliance of Nations, Sordland 1, flight to Kirut. I, David Visky, and the rest of the Swordish delegation to the Alliance of Nations arrived in Kirut. The local police escorted us to the Alliance's headquarters in downtown Constantium, immediately recognizable by its gleaming dome. On entering the building, we were met with a parliamentary guide, who briefed us about the procedures. After strict security screening, the staff ushered us to the 3rd floor. We entered the massive circular assembly hall and took our designated seats. David sat next to me. All of the world's most powerful people under one gleaming dome. And I'm glad to be among them. Everyone's words and actions here will change the world, for better or worse, said David. How are you feeling, Anton? Ever since the assassination, I'm amazed that you've been holding up so well. It must have been tough for Suzerain and the kids. We knew changing Sordland is hard, but we could never expect it to be this way. It's tough to be the president, making harsh decisions and dealing with their consequences. I wish we could have supported you more, but the time has been a cruel mistress. What you have done is more than enough. Don't treat yourself so harshly. From the distance, you could see the president of the General Assembly, Mr. Nines, approaching his designated position. Well, the session is about to start. Let's get comfortable. It's going to be a long day. Mr. Nines opened the session with a short speech and called the first speaker to the floor. It's my great pleasure to invite the Prime Minister of Lesbia to address the Assembly. Patricio Alvarez stood and walked to the podium as the Assembly applauded. Mr. President, it's my pleasure to return to the podium. David leaned in and spoke in a low voice. Let's see how crazy this year's session will get. Stay silent and listen to Alvarez's speech. When I last spoke here, said Alvarez, the message I gave was of encouragement and support to this organisation and the vital role it plays. Of all the challenges Eastern Mokopa and the whole world has faced since then, one has grown larger and more imminent than any other. The threat of the so-called socialist states and the actions taken by their authoritarian rulers with no regard for international law. A loud noise came from the table of Valksland. I saw Emmerich Hegel pounding his fist on the table in protest. Looks like the Chancellor is already mad. David nodded. Today the need to come together as the leaders of the free world is more important than ever. The CSP, under the leadership of United Contana, has been fueling Valksland's military-industrial complex and its expansionist aims in Eastern Mokopa. The world turned a blind eye when the armies of Valksland occupied Helgeland, and they did not stop there. According to our intelligence reports, United Contana-made nuclear missiles were quickly deployed to the island. He pulled out a photograph. Even though it was hard to see from my position, I recognized it as an aerial image of Helgeland. We demand that the Chancellor speak the truth. As you can see, we have evidence of the construction of silos. This is huge. If it's true, it's a threat to all of us. I didn't expect them to be so quick after their operation. David looked concerned. No, Eastern Mokopan nation can accept the installation of weapons of mass destruction in the middle of the Maghian Sea. Emmerich Hegel stood up and kept pounding his fists. We hereby call for the immediate dismantling and withdrawal of all missiles and other offensive weapons from Helgeland. We invite all member states to support our call for a resolution in accordance with Article 11 of the Felenko Treaty. A lot of noise came from the Assembly Hall in response. Most of the Western Mokopan delegates were clapping, while others either shouted in protest or sat in stony silence. Let us also not forget about the recent events that transpired in another state with socialist-leaning teachings, a state that wages war against its own citizens, Velen. Whether he's socialist or not, he has a point. David nodded intently. Their purge of the minorities in their country was again largely ignored by the international community. I would go so far as to call it a genocide. Velen violated our past treaties and mobilized their armed forces, deploying them close to our borders and authorizing them to partake in massacres. Lesbia was affected not only by large waves of refugees coming from Velen, but by the subsequent government seizure of all of our companies that were active in the country. We hereby call the member states to take action against Velen and its rogue government. Thank you. I won't react, I'll listen. He walked back to his seat amidst enthusiastic applause from most of the Mokopan delegates. President Nines waited for the noise to calm down and invited the next speaker, the President of Velen, Victor Smolak. Smolak stood up. As he walked past Patricio Alvarez, he brushed him aside with an exaggerated sweep of his arms. When he reached the podium, he fumbled with the microphone for a few seconds, then he smiled at Alvarez mockingly as he raised the the height of it. Look at all the theatrics. Yes, that's him. Victor turned to President Nines and bowed slightly. Mr. President. He then turned back to us and stared out into the hall for a few seconds. Fellow delegates. It is true that the world today faces a multitude of challenges. In the midst of these challenges, the world's most powerful leaders gather here in Kirut. And what do? They make threats, promote hate, and spread lies. Is this the alliance of nations we all want? Where is the cooperation and friendship? Where is the unity? I want to remind you of the wars that the West fought against on our soil, of the foreign troops who occupied our country and seized our valuable resources. I want to remind you how they stole the oil from our sacred soil, and they did not know when to stop. The ATO soldiers left, but their interference never ceased. They financed armed rebel groups whose only purpose is to create terror inside our country. So, fellow delegates, don't you dare speak about Welland before you acknowledge your own involvement in our civil war, before you acknowledge your own dark past. That's an empty argument. It doesn't justify what Welland did. What did you expect, Mr. President? It's President Smolak. Very true. As is well known, after the tremendous tragedy of the Welland Civil War, Acacia made a deal with the United Contana, where they agreed upon the withdrawal of their troops along with the removal of half of our army. Not only did they weaken us, we were left alone in facing the genocidal Bloodish Freedom Front, which the ATO funds together with Brumberg. Just like the delegate before me, I will show you some of the evidence of the foreign interference. He picked up a large stack of papers and waved them back and forth. I have clear evidence of a direct aid from Brumberg to the Bloodish Freedom Front. They smuggled tons of Ka-74s in Welland. They smuggled in their spies, smuggled in their mercenary commanders. He's got ball, taking on Brumberg in the west like that. David nodded in agreement. These documents will be published everywhere. Copies have already been sent to the investigative affairs of the Alliance of Nations. I expect this organisation to do its task and investigate this properly, instead of leaving Welland behind, as they have always done. Coming back to the claims of the lesbian representative, first, there is no evidence of civilian massacres. Oh, bullshit. Nor so-called purged minorities. Second, the operation was limited only to the militant BFF, not the Bloods in general. Third, we know your government is also implicated in the funding of the BFF, and that your oil companies aided their militants during the operation. Fourth, as the state, we only took what was ours. The companies that the delegate spoke of were not only aiding militants, they were brought to Welland by force. Know that Welland will no longer recognise the rights of any other country to determine what type of weapons we are permitted to possess, or what type of policies we must follow within our border. Welland stands stronger and more united than ever. Our people have spoken. The enemies inside our borders are crushed. Now I ask every delegate here to read our report on the connections of the West and the armed militants in Eastern Marcopa, and I ask the Alliance of Nations to do what's right. Welland only wants peace. Our people want peace. They are counting on the support and understanding of all the nations of the world. Their proclamation is free Welland or death. The assembly roared, with particular loud applause coming from the seats of Rican nations. He seems to be popular with Rica, doesn't he? Well, he played the victim here pretty strongly, and his anti-imperialist speech has definitely earned him sympathy from Ricans. Most of that continent has still not achieved stability after gaining their independence from colonial suzerains. It's easy to forget it has only been a few years since the revolutions. Victor slowly walked back to his seat, and as he applauded himself, he saluted the Rican delegates as he passed them. Next, President Nines invited Martin van Houten to the podium. He walked up to the microphone with quick steps. He was frowning and clenching his fists. I could almost see his jaw trembling. It seems like Martin is not in the mood. Can you blame him? Valsland just occupied Helgeland. Mr. President, fellow delegates of the Assembly and friends, it's an honour to be with you today. I wish we could meet under different circumstances. Once again, the CSP nations, and in particular Valsland, have shown us what they're willing to do to achieve their political aims. I must sadly say that the world has left us alone. We were one of the first countries to propose proper cooperation between Eastern Marcopa nations. You tried to bully us, let's be honest. Yet when we were threatened by Valkslandian expansionism, nobody came to our side. Although Mr. Alvarez voiced his indirect support for us earlier in today's session, I can't keep myself from wondering where he was when our lands were under invasion by the very socialists he spoke about. So here I am, asking for support of the fellow members of the Alliance of Nations. Agnolia is under attack from Valksland. A loud banging noise emerged from the table of Valkslandian delegates. All of them were pounding their fists on the table. Well, keep watching. Mr. President, please moderate the assembly. This is more than disrespectful. Emmerich Hegel began shouting curses as Nines repeatedly banged his gavel for order. After a minute of back and forth shouting, the noise settled and Nines allowed Martin to continue. As you all know, Helgeland, which has been a territory of Agnolia for more than 3 decades, was invaded by Valksland in a sudden attack. Not only did they unlawfully occupy our land, they brought their nuclear missiles to the island the moment our forces retreated. Millennialist terror surrounds us all on all sides. We must not falter. I invite all members to find a resolution in accordance with Article 11 of the Falenko Treaty, enforcing the immediate dismantling of all missiles in Helgeland. I must also remind you that under Article 3 of the Ventry City Treaty, the Alliance of Nations must ensure the withdrawal of occupying forces from the island. I call the democratic world to action against the tyranny of millennialism, authoritarianism, militarism and extremism. The banging noise started again. Hegel stood up and approached the rostrum. You are a spineless jerk, said Emmerich Hegel, a lackey of Acasian imperialism. President Nines called for silence and started hitting the gavel. What does he think he's doing? All of your complaints against us are a direct result of your capitalist and neo-colonialist systems. President Nine, please, what is this? President Nine smacked his gavel in vain as shouting match broke out in the assembly. Finally, after a few minutes, the other Valklandian delegates convinced Hegel to sit back down. I believe I don't need to speak more about this subject. Everything is clear as day. Mr. Hegel's actions speak volumes about the reality of the Valksland and their corrupted ideology. I hope to see this conflict resolved with the help of the Alliance of Nations soon. He quickly left the podium and nodded to the other Agnolian delegate. The two left the assembly hall. President Nines announced the next speaker, Emmerich Hegel. Hegel immediately took his place and spoke in low, soothing tone. Thank you. David, buckle up, it's the Chancellor's turn now. It looks like you're having fun, Mr. President. First of all, I want to extend a due welcome to the new states from Rica that have joined the organization. After fighting for years against colonialism and imperialism, they more than earned their membership vote. I am overjoyed to see them finally represented in the Assembly. As our numbers grow and more states are represented in this stage, we become ever closer to finding resolutions to the conflicts that plague us. For hundreds of years, the dominant economies of Makopa raised, pillaged and exploited the continents of Rica and Xena. Sadly, Valkland was also a part of this plunder in the years before the revolution, when it still clung to the idea of imperialism. But when our masses found their voice, the old colonial powers and their new financiers turned against them. These powers did whatever they could to hamper our revolutions. They did not want the people to be heard. They are scared of us for showing the possibility of a better path. Of course they don't want us to succeed. We threaten the productivity that runs on the blood and sweat of their working class. And now they've started labelling us as aggressors. Yet we all know it was the Arcasians who built up military bases all around Makopa. It was also the ATO that was first formed to fight against millennialism. Keep watching. Helgeland was and will be Valkslandian territory. Our intervention in the island was completely justified. Mr. Delegates brought up the Falenko and Ventry City treaties. However, they are forgetting about the Treaty of Constantium. Valkslandian exercised its right to intervene on behalf of our people, who were being oppressed and massacred by the Agnolian government just because they did not recognise an appointed governor. They didn't get to elect one. We acted in full accordance with the second article of the treaty. If there's a side to be blamed, it is the state which murders its minorities for publicly showing support to our nation. There were also claims about illegal missiles. No country in the world has the right to determine what type of weapons we import. If there's a conflict, the Alliance can resolve. Let's start with the Arcasian base on Ravnos Island. Lesbia has been housing Arcasian troops and missiles by our border for years, and none of the member states even talk about it. I also want member states to look into the Arcasian bases in both Lesbia and Sordland. And if the Alliance of Nations truly claims to have the people's best interests at heart, they cannot stay silent about what the Agnolian government did in Helgeland, how they took away the rights of our people. Perhaps then there can be proper dialogue between our nations, and the Alliance of Nations can finally demonstrate that it can serve its intended purpose. But unfortunately, the Alliance of Nations remains all too willing to overlook such human rights violations. However, the Valgslandian government is ready, as always, to fight the forces of oppression and colonial servitude on behalf of free people everywhere. He raised his fist. Was that Swordish? Did I catch that right? He said the revolution will come, yes, but it was in Old Valglish. Very similar to Swordish, right? Some words are even written the same way, but I'm surprised you caught that from his accent. Most of the delegates from Xena, Rika and Cortana responded with thunderous applause. Hegel shook his hands with them as he walked back to his seat. President Nines announced the next speaker, Queen Beatrice Livingston. Dear President of the Assembly, dear delegates, dear leaders of the world. Just as my fellow Eastern Macopan delegates spoke out about troubles plaguing our continent, I also have to bring attention to the plight of the people of the North. The Alliance of Nations, the ATO, the CSP, and even the OMEC have never supported our people when they've been through tragic atrocities. Unlike many of the Western countries here, we never received financial aid when natural disasters struck our lands. The pain of our people was never recognised, not even when they faced the threat of genocide at the hands of Swordish kings. In light of all that, I implored this alliance to take a closer look at the actions of our southern neighbours. They took in traitors and gave them protection. Their president even went so far as to blame our country for spying on his administration through his own private secretary. And he expects the world to believe all his lies. Mr. President, point of order. President Nines overruled my objection and told me to wait for the Queen to finish speaking. I hereby invite all of you to determine the initiation of a proper intergovernmental investigation into Sordland. If the Alliance continues to shirk its given duties, you can trust in Rumberg to take matters into her own hands. It is also important to point out that Rumberg will not stand idly by more Arcasian military and transferred into Eastern Macopa. I hereby condemn both the ATO and Sordland for allowing Arcasia to settle in the region. Before I finish, I also want to say, Mr. Smolak, I'm looking forward to reading your report. I wonder what this so-called evidence is all about. Know that your slander does not work on us. Know that we are ready to die for our freedom. Know that our kingdom stands firm and strong. Expect a grand awakening. Thank you. Grand awakening? That sounded like a threat. She left the rostrum without getting much applause. Then President Nine spoke my name. Mr. Anton Rayne, President of Sordland, I invite you to address the Assembly. David immediately started applauding. Good luck, Mr. President. I walked up to the rostrum and took my place at the podium. In front of me were some of the most powerful leaders in the entire world. I looked them in the eyes. Thank you, Mr. President, fellow delegates. Good intro. Anybody who attends this rostrum must appreciate what a significant gathering is addressing. Stressing the importance of these words, Alliance of Nations. Just as the speakers who preceded me, we too have our concerns to raise. We must remain devoted to the dream of a peaceful world. We have our concerns to raise. Our century is a century of struggle for freedom, a century of liberation from foreign occupation. Our people are still not free from fear, not free from poverty and starvation. Our world is faced with the dangers of division, the danger of large military alliances and nuclear arms races. Now it is more important than ever to set aside our differences. It's time to ask hard questions. Ask if this organisation is achieving any of its aims. Confronted by a difficult choice, our great achievements may either be used for the benefit or to the detriment of mankind. I'd like to address some of the topics mentioned here today. It was earlier claimed that Welland was involved in a genocide. Nope. We are deeply saddened by... I condemn Smollett's crimes against the Bloodish people. Sordland stands together with Bloodish people. I'd also like to extend my support to Miss Van Horten to address the Queen of Rumburg. Hypothetical threat that our nation posed to Eastern Mokopa, while Rumburg's military has tripled in the last decade. A threat to Eastern Mokopa has always been Rumburg. Today it is still the case. Sordland's always wanted a peace between our nations, yet we are being threatened by Rumburg. I condemn your actions and speech. I'm going tough. Being nice hasn't helped. And I figure he's kind of under stress right now. I also have some evidence to show that to the Assembly Mr. Smollett was right about the K-874s. Rumburg has definitely been arming the PFF in Sordland. We discovered that many militant groups in Sordland were being financed and armed by Rumburg. There's another important piece of information that we have, provided to us by someone close to the Rumburgian government. Mr. Hailstone was branded traitor in Rumburg for blowing the whistle on the country's hidden nuclear facilities. I hereby call on the Alliance of Nations to serve its duty. Rumburg and its nuclear facilities must be properly investigated. By calling on the Alliance of Nations to support Sordland, we are facing an existential threat. Now I'd like to bring a speech to my close. Thank you for listening to our concerns. I wish to see a resolution from the AN soon. We stand and always will stand for the rights of people of Sordland and Eastern Mokopa, just as those in those other continents. If the right actions are not taken, it will be quite evident that international relations cannot continue on such a basis. The AN can no longer fail to ignore the machinations of the enemies of peace. There cannot be any more procrastination or delay. The AN must adopt decisions in according to the wishes of the people of the world. Amogna Vezkor. There was some applause from the Assembly. Thank you. I left the podium. I went back to my seat. David did not stop applauding until I sat down. How was it? It was not a bad speech, Mr. President. You did well. President Nines announced the next speaker Dwight Walker. Mr. President, I first want to congratulate you on your election to this high office. Mr. Secretary, delegates of the Alliance of Nations, ladies and gentlemen, fellow friends. We meet again on our quest to bring peace and light into this world. But even though some of the clouds have lifted, the world has not yet escaped the darkness. The Contanan Security Pact is rapidly expanding its influence. It is very troubling to see a democratic nation of Mokopa be invaded by those millennialist powers. I refer, of course, to Helgeland's occupation by Velsland. This is an attack against the lasting peace the world has enjoyed since a century of revolutions. Today our peacekeeping obligations are being tested by United Contana and the Meliorist bloc. We failed to counter and stop this threat. If we stay idle and allow them to build new walls and weapons of hostility, if the attackers do not face any consequences, then this unstable peace we believed we had built will be the world's downfall, and posterity will point its finger at us for not stopping it. Emil, Hegel, and the other Valkslandian delegates started making noise again. This time Hegel had taken his shoe off and was banging the table with it. The Chancellor's gone mad. It's getting ridiculous. He's not even ashamed at his age. Despite its claims, CSP's actions will only bring about war. We believe United Contana and Acacia, together with their allies, could come to an understanding for our mutual benefit and our desire to avoid the destruction of the world. Yet United Contana keeps acting in complete disregard to international law. Their allies are forcefully taking land and imposing their own values on the people of those lands. I will say this to the leaders of United Contana. If either of us is to be secure, we need peaceful cooperation, not nuclear missiles, shows of naval superiority or invasion. If the leaders of United Contana fail to demilitarize Helgeland, with complete dismantling of nuclear missiles and withdrawal of occupying Valslandian forces, the ATO will have to take matters into its own hands. Eggle stood up with his shoe in hand. What is that supposed to mean? You're promoting war in the Alliance of Nations? Mr. President, this cannot... Nine slammed the gavel down and shouted, "Silence, please!" Mr. Chancellor, please let me finish. We did not interrupt you when you addressed the Assembly. I must also raise my concerns about the threat that Rumberg poses in eastern Macopa. The speakers who preceded me clearly showed that tensions are rising, that reports from Velen and Sordland are troubling. The representatives of both countries referred to K-74s being smuggled within their borders. Mr. Rayne also pointed out the construction of nuclear weapons in Rumberg. Our intelligence also confirms this. Acacia and the ATO will stand against the aggression of Rumberg. They are playing a dangerous game, one that may bring ruin to Macopa and their own lands. I believe the Alliance of Nations can find a resolution to this conflict as well. If not, let it be known that Acacia will stand together with Sordland. Rumberg cannot do as it pleases. It's great news, I hope he means it. This is definitely good news. Acacia is showing clear support for us. Finally, I propose that the Alliance of Nations undertake the noble cause of helping the people of the world through rewriting and properly enforcing its human rights declaration. The Alliance of Nations cannot survive as a static organisation. Its size and duties are increasing enormously. It should adapt to the changing world. But peace and rights do not rest in the hands of the organisation alone. They rely on the hearts of the people and the spirit of the cooperation between our nations. So let it be known, my fellow inhabitants of this world, let us take our stand and see if we can finally achieve lasting peace. Thank you. Most of the assembly applauded the speech, the ATO delegates in particular. Stand up and applaud his speech. The applause continued for some time. Walker shook hands with various delegates on his way back to his seat. President Nines announced the last speaker. It was Leon Malinev. Malinev walked slowly to the rostrum in his iconic suit. All of the CSP delegates stood up and applauded him. Honourable Chairman and fellow delegates of the Alliance of Nations, here we are again at the most esteemed meeting of the state representatives of the world. However, increasingly we are being threatened, disregarded, attacked or ignored in this assembly. The representatives of Acacia has just shown this unfriendly attitude towards us yet again. Acacia would have you believe we are standing in the way of lasting peace, yet the peace they talk about was only possible thanks to our missiles and our growing base in the developing world. The ATO kept waging wars against people's revolutions and forcing new independent states to be their puppets, binding them to themselves through Arcasian lira. And now yet another Arcasian president is telling us that we are the aggressors and they are the keepers of peace. We will not be silent anymore against these lies. When was this peace you talk about? Where was this cooperation between our countries? Have you ever accepted our invitation to talk about denuclearization? If you don't like us, don't accept our deals, don't listen to our concerns, and keep pointing fingers at us, why did you invite us to the Alliance of Nations? Every year United Contana comes to this assembly to address the real problem of real people. People who suffer because of your systems, your wars, and your ignorance. Whether you like it or not, we'll keep representing the labourers, the slaves, the oppressed of the world, and believe it or disregard it, history is on our side. We say to the representative of capitalist countries, come and visit us, come and see the revolution working in Contana. Show our continent to your people without distorting the reality. If you cannot do that, then you need not come. We believe socialism will triumph over capitalism in the end. Such is the logical conclusion of the development of humankind. This time, lesbian delegates started laughing very loudly. Some other delegates booed. Ridiculous. Well, any of it, or they're laughing. And both, to be honest. You can keep laughing, gentlemen. Communism will bury you. Suddenly, the laughing turned into shouting. If you really believe in cooperation, we will be waiting. We're not going anywhere. However, if the ATO keeps intervening in our matters, it's natural that the CSP would react. Despite threats from the ATO, Rumberg or any other nation or organisation, we must not succumb to further division and violence. We must ask ourselves what do the people of our countries expect from us. They surely don't want war and bloodshed. So let us leave to our children and grandchildren good memories of the time and a better future for all. Let them look at history and say, once there were great nations and complex problems, but the leaders of the world came together in the Alliance of Nations and succeeded in settling them in order to ensure our peaceful lives. Let us act in such a way as to make this session not a session of threats, but a session of hopes and the realization of them. The governments of the United Contana and the United Peoples of Contana are ready to serve their duties to the world. Long live the People's Revolution. Don't react. The assembly broke into massive applause. The applause continued for some time. Maleniev slowly walked back to his seat as the president announced a break. That was a lot. It definitely was. It's quite scary, to be honest, said David. We need to be careful. We walked out of the hall to have some lunch and fresh air. Well, we're around an hour and a half. We're going to end it there. I suspect we are moving very much into endgame. There's various things that could happen. Resignation, impeachment, assassination, war. And I have been Yorkie the Talespinner. This has been Suzerain. I shall see you next time.